Hello, hello. Welcome to the B78 Endurance Hub weekly webinar. Today's topic, I think, will be of much interest to especially beginners who are getting into the triathlon world. It's the topic of transitions. This is one of the things that makes the sport of triathlon so unique is that you transition from one sport to the next and then you do it again. And specifically, we're talking about, for the most part, transitioning from swim to bike and then transitioning from bike to run. Not a lot of sports do that. In fact, I'm not sure if I can think of anything else that does. You might want to throw biathlon into that mix where you are cross country skiing and then you're shooting a rifle at a target. I suppose that's some kind of a transition, and then you transition back to skiing. But for the most part, it is unique to triathlon, and it's one of the things I think that athletes who get into the sport are excited about. Partly because it just adds an element of it's different. The very nature of triathlon, I think, is people like it because there's three different sports, and so you can be, maybe strong in one and maybe a little weaker in the other, but at least you're strong in one. um, and then the transition side of it, people take a lot of pride in their ability to do fast transitions. And at some of the bigger events, you'll actually see a transition time. Especially these days with electronic timing, where you're generally wearing kind of a microchip or some sort of sensor on your ankle. And so they can very accurately measure when you came into the transition and when you left the transition, and they'll give you a time. And we used to take great pride in who could have the fastest transitions. What you'll learn today, we're going to go through the very basics of the swim to bike transition and then the bike to run transition. What I'd also like to sort of share with you is that the shorter and faster an event is, arguably, the more important a transition is. If we think of it in extremes, at the Olympic level, if you watch the Olympic Games on TV or the World Cup triathlon circuit on TV, the speed at which the athletes do the transition is quite remarkable. And, aside from the fact that maybe they have bragging rights because they're fast at transitions, it really plays into the overall strategy of the race itself. Particularly if you're going from swim to bike and it's draft legal in the Olympics and at World Cup races. And so you need to be in the right group. If you get dropped through the transition and now you're riding your bike on your own, you're going to move much more slowly than you will with a group. Or maybe you can move as quickly, but it's going to cost you a lot more energy. So the transitions are crucial, and the same thing applies in the bike to run transition at the higher levels. Every second counts, and those races are won or lost sometimes in seconds. And so if you have a fast transition, it can make all the difference. At the other end of the spectrum, in Ironman events, the transition actually becomes, I don't want to say less important. It's still important to have a fast and very deliberate transition, but the strategy is a little bit different. The race is so long that maybe a few seconds here or there is not necessarily going to make the difference, although sometimes it does. What's more important is that you move through the transition very deliberately, and you set yourself up for the next event in a way to be as comfortable as possible. Now, again, at the highest levels, Ironman World Championships in Kona, or this year was St. George. Even at the Ironman distance, the transition is really important because they do get together, especially on the bike. Assuming they're legal distance apart on the bike, there's still an advantage, I would argue, to being with the lead group or any group really on the bike. So the transition is still important, but for most age group triathletes, the goal really in an Ironman transition is to set yourself up for the next leg of the event. So whether you're, getting on your bike or starting to run, in a position where you're comfortable. So maybe you do a change of clothing. Maybe you're putting socks on so that you avoid blisters. Maybe you're putting sunscreen on. Maybe you're grabbing some nutrition. Maybe you're even grabbing ice to cool down a little bit. So there's lots of other things that potentially happen in a long distance triathlon that do not need to happen in a short distance triathlon. So depending on the event you're doing, it's important to evaluate that and take stock of what is the most important thing for you to do. So today, though, what I really want to do is just run through the basics of how to do a transition from swim to bike and how to do a transition from bike to run, and hopefully leave you with some little bits of advice that will serve you well if you're just getting into the sport. How to have speedy transitions. Should also say how to have effective transitions or how to have smart transitions. They don't always need to be speedy in order to be effective. So let's first of all talk about the transition from swim to bike. So this is when you've done your swim leg out in the lake or even in a pool in some cases, and now you have to get yourself to your bike and get out on the bike. So the first thing to consider is the run up. So you'll notice in this picture, this athlete, you can see in the very background there, there's a lake. And so this athlete has just come out of the lake. And typically at most events, there will be a very clear designation as to where you are supposed to get out of the water. And so in this case, you can see a yellow, I believe it's a power bar kind of archway that would be inflated. This is really nice for when you're actually swimming because it gives you something to spot. It gives you something to look up and see where you're actually supposed to go. And so that's the first step in this transition, is that this athlete has now finished the swim. They've stood up wherever it makes sense to stand up in the water, and now they're running, and they're running towards the transition area to get on their bike. A couple other things you'll note, hard to see in this picture, but just behind this athlete, you will see some timing mats on the ground. So these are the things that are going to take account for when this athlete's ankle sort of device or little timing chip has gone across the mat, and that's the spot where their transition time will start. And then likewise at the other end, when the athlete leaves the transition area with their bike, then it will give them that little transition time. Another thing you'll notice in this picture is that this athlete is wearing a wetsuit. And most races, especially in North America, will be wetsuit swims. But in the event that there's a non-wetsuit swim, then the transition's a little bit different. Of course, the main difference is that this athlete will need to get their wetsuit off. And so the smartest and speediest way to start this transition is that when you're running towards your bike, you can get things accomplished. So one of the things this athlete has already accomplished is that they have taken their swim cap and their goggles off of their head. The next smart thing that this athlete could do is to actually get the top part of their wetsuit off. So they would reach behind and they would grab the little string that will pull their zipper down, and then they can work their arms, out of the suit, so that when they get to their bike, all they have left is to get the leg part of their suit off. It makes no sense to do it all at your bike. You're just wasting time. There's things that you can do on your way to your bike that will help speed up your transition. One little golden nugget of a tip here is you'll see that the athlete has their swim cap and their goggles in their hand. A nice little trick is that when you pull the arm of that suit off of your body, you can literally hold on to that swim cap and goggles with your fist. And as you pull the sleeve of the wetsuit off, you can let go of it, and your goggles and cap will reside nicely inside the sleeve of your wetsuit, taking one little part out of the equation and making it easy for you to find your goggles and swim cap at the end of the race. It's a nice little trick to do, rather than just chucking those down on the ground beside your bike and maybe you can't find them later, or they get away from you. So this athlete will then run up to their bike, and the next slide we'll do is the setup. So this is the transition setup. So you'll see this is at a very small race. You'll see the athletes' bikes are on bike racks. Now, the larger the race, the more bike racks that you'll see. Sometimes at the larger Ironman events, these bike racks will be managed by a team of individuals. In this case, it's a very small race. And so the athletes have quick and easy access to their bike. Now, a couple things to note here. You'll notice that the bikes are hanging from the saddle. That's very typical. And that these athletes, these are young athletes, they're speedy and they're smart. And so they have the bike aligned in such a way that when they grab their bike, it's quick and easy for them to get moving forwards. The opposition to this would be, let's say, if they had parked their bike going front wheel in first, then they would have to pull it off and turn their bike around and get moving, which costs you time. So they have set their bikes up in a really smart way such that they can just grab their bike and away they go. Couple other things to notice, really, really important. You must never be touching your bike when if you do not have your helmet on. So you'll see the very first thing that these athletes are doing is putting their helmet on and buckling their helmet before they even touch the bike. You will get a penalty. Often you'll get a warning if you're a true beginner, but they can, give you a time penalty. They can put you in a penalty box. They can do all kinds of things that aren't fun if you are running around with your bike and you do not have your helmet on or your helmet buckled. Really, really important first step. So this athlete will put their helmet on. And then you'll notice there's two ways to go about this. So you'll see that these athletes actually have their bike shoes attached to the pedals already. So this is a little bit higher level way to go about transition. And so what this athlete will do is they will run out of the transition in bare feet. And then they will jump on their bike and they'll start pedaling. And then they'll kind of put their bare feet on top of the shoes. And then they will put their feet in the shoes as they're actually riding. And now what this does is it really dramatically speeds up your transition, because the alternative to this is that you actually put your bike shoes on in this moment. So you put your helmet on, you put your bike shoes on, and then you run out of the transition in your bike shoes, and then you jump on your bike and you clip into your pedals. So the benefit to that is if you're a real beginner, that is what I would do. If you're a beginner, get your bike shoes on, get your helmet on, and then run out of transition with your bike shoes on. So it makes it easy when you are able to get on your bike, and we'll talk about that in a second. You can clip your feet in just like you would if you were going for a training ride. A couple little drawbacks to that is now you're running on concrete, generally, if it's in a parking lot. You're running on concrete with a bike shoe, which is quite awkward and sometimes can be quite slippery. So you need to be careful of that. Couple other little things to discuss in this moment. What about sunglasses? So again, the more entry level way to do this is, get the helmet on and then put the glasses on and then your bike shoes on, and then you can carry on and get going. At the higher level, they may not even wear glasses. In fact, if it's a super sprint race or something really short, they may not even bother with glasses. It's just one other element that they have to contend with, and they don't want to, they don't want to have something that slows them down. However, some athletes will attach the glasses to the bike themselves, the bike itself. So when they're actually moving and they're up to speed, now they can get the glasses on. Again, this is a difference kind of between short course racing and long course. For Ironman, you can take your time a little bit more. You can get those glasses on right away if you want. One small caution is if you've just come out of the water and you're wet. Sometimes those glasses can fog up, which can be a little dangerous and a little annoying. So I always like to have my glasses tucked in somewhere on my bike, guaranteed in a place that they weren't going to fall off when I was running out of transition. So usually what I would do is take the arm of the glasses and I would slide it under the pad of my aero bar. So where my elbows went, it was usually Velcroed on there, and I could kind of like wedge the sunglasses in there. But these are all things that you'll want to try and experiment with and have an absolute guarantee that you're not going to have things flying all over the place when you're trying to get going. So now, next step, the run out. So a couple pictures here for you as well. Now, these athletes will then take their bike from the rack and they will run their bike out to the spot where they're allowed to. Now, this brings me to the next incredibly important point, which is at all events, there will be a mount and a dismount line. And all that means is there is a designated spot whereby after you have gone past that spot, you may now get on your bike. You cannot ride your bike in the transition area. That is cause for a very severe penalty, even disqualification. And it's definitely a safety issue, right? You go to big events, they have 500, 600, maybe 1,000, maybe even a couple thousand people at the big Ironman events. And if you had people riding their bikes around transition, that would be a bit of a disaster. Without fail, I can tell you at most grassroots events, there will always be somebody who gets on their bike too early. And it's not funny, but it kind of is. And that's not in a mean way. We've all been beginners at one point. I certainly have had my fair share of beginner moments. But this one's a really important one because it can actually get you disqualified quite quickly. And again, it's purely a safety issue. So you'll see the picture on the left there. The athletes are running their bikes out. A couple different ways you can do that. You'll see the athlete at the back has control of the seat and the handlebars, which is the way that I would recommend doing it because then you have control of your entire bike. The athlete in front, I think, just has the handlebars, and that may be because they're past the mount line and they're just about to get onto the bike. And I think the athlete maybe in the middle is just holding onto the seat. So you can run with your bike just holding onto the seat because that front wheel generally will track quite straight. But you want to make sure. So again, if you're a beginner, take your time, maybe even walk. You don't need to sprint, and do it in a way that guarantees success. And as you progress and get a little bit more competent in the sport, you can try different ways. These athletes obviously all are in bare feet or socked feet, and they're going to jump on their bike and then they're going to put their shoes on as they are riding. So they're doing it at the highest level, which is kind of cool. Okay. Now let's talk about the second transition, the bike to run transition. So just like I explained from going from swim to bike, there is a mount line. When you go from bike to run, the second transition or T2, I should clarify actually, first transition or transition one is often referred to as T1, and the second transition from bike to run is often referred to as T2. So in this case, you'll be finishing up the bike ride, and there will be a very clear designated dismount line. Now, for good reason, again, safety, the officials are ruthless with this one. You must be off of your bike before the dismount line. You can't ride past the dismount line. You must be off your bike before the dismount line. Super, super important. The other part about helmet, I cannot stress this enough. You cannot unclip your helmet until your bike is in the bike rack. So, so important. You will get a penalty and possibly disqualified, depending on the specific rules of the event. So, in this case, you'll see the athlete here is coming in and they're obviously getting close to the dismount line. Now, this athlete's doing it at a slightly higher level, and that the bike is still moving forward. They're swinging their leg over and they're coasting in. And as soon as they get to that dismount line, they'll jump off their bike and start running. The more entry level way to do it, and again, I would stress to do it this way if you are new to the sport and just getting comfortable with these things, is just stop your bike as if you would at the end of a training ride, unclip before you stop so you don't fall over, and then get off the bike in the same way that you would if you were on a training ride. That likely means that you will have your bike shoes still on. In this case, you'll see this athlete's wearing their shoes, which is totally fine. At the higher level, as they are coming towards the dismount line, they'll actually take their feet out of their shoes and they'll leave their shoes clipped into the pedals. Again, it's a big time saver because when they get back to the bike rack, all they have to do is put their running shoes on. Okay. So, coming up to the dismount line, swing the leg over or stop the bike and get off. And then we get to transition 2 or T2 setup. And in this case, you'll be coming back to the bike rack. You can see this athlete must be one of the first athletes back because there's no other bikes on the bike rack. So that would suggest that everybody else is still out on their bike. And then this athlete's coming in the most efficient way possible is just racking their bike. So in this case, hanging the bike off of the bike seat. That's probably a really quick way. So the athlete's just kind of like rolling in and boom, the bike goes on the bike rack in the most efficient and fast way possible. You can see that this athlete has, in fact, left their shoes in their pedals. You can see that there. And super important, this athlete has not removed their helmet yet. The bike is in the rack. So now they will be okay to remove the helmet. Very, very important. Cannot be touching your bike unless your helmet is on and buckled up. Okay, you can see this athlete's keeping it real simple. They don't have anything else there except their running shoes on the ground. So the bike is racked, helmet will come off, and then the running shoes can come on. Okay, and then the run out. So you'll see the first picture on the left there. The athlete is, the bike is racked, helmet still on. They're very mindful of this. And my guess is that maybe they've learned the hard way. So the helmet, like last thing to come off before you go out so that you guarantee that you're not going to get a penalty. The shoes will go on. Now, here's a real speedy little trick. The fastest athletes will use some kind of a lacing system in the shoes to make it super fast for them to get their shoes on and for them to get going. So at the highest level, they are not sitting down and tying their shoes. What they're doing is using elastic laces. So these are easy to find at any triathlon shop. Often running shoe stores will have them, maybe bike stores if they dabble a little bit in triathlon gear. And the elastic laces are great because you lace them up and they're nice and snug against your foot. They hold your foot like a lace would, but they're stretchy. So you can easily kind of open up the shoe and get your foot in there. And then the run out. And basically, you just from there, you run out and away you go. What I would like to talk about now, just to kind of throw a couple other little things at you, is we'll go back to the beginning. Okay. So, one of the most important things that you can do to make sure that your transitions are not only speedy, but smart and efficient is to do a walkthrough of the transition the day before or the morning of the event. Okay. So if you're going to an event where you have to take your bike the day before, which is usually the case, or maybe, the transition area is set up and you're going to get your registration package with your number. If it's a smaller race, take an extra 20 minutes and do a walkthrough of the transition area. So this means go down to the swim exit and have a look. Stand on the beach and see if you can, see where you're supposed to get out of the water. If that finish gantry or that finish kind of banner area is already set up, it should be fairly easy. And then actually walk through the transition. Do it once or twice so that on race day, there's absolutely no question about where you're supposed to go. There's nothing worse, and I've done this, there's nothing worse than during the race, you get out of the water and you have no clue where you're supposed to go. It's kind of inexcusable too, to be honest with you. It's a very simple step you can take to just do a transition walkthrough so that on the day, you know where you're going. So you would, in your transition walkthrough, we call this knowing the flow of transition. You're going to walk from the water. You're going to walk all the way up and you're going to find your bike. Now, this one is easy. If you're at a small grassroots event with 50 people, should be fairly easy to find your bike. If you're at a larger event with 1,000, 2,000 people, it can be really challenging to find your bike. So you need to do maybe a couple of walkthroughs or maybe find some small landmarks or indicators of where your bike actually is. Often at the bigger events, it is not a free for all. And by that, I mean, you can't just put your bike anywhere. They'll be numbered. So there'll be a specific spot for you to put your bike. And it's really, really important that you know where you're supposed to go. Walk through a few times. Unfortunately, you cannot attach anything to your bike. So in the old days, some people used to put a big set of balloons up the back. So they'd be like, oh, I know that that's my bike. No, you can't do that. You just have to know where you're going and you have to be confident about where you're going. So maybe that's counting the number of bike racks you have to run past before you get to your bike, whatever strategy you need to use. I used to use actually a fairly brightly colored towel that I would put on the ground sometimes. At Ironman events, that doesn't necessarily happen because they're going to give you a bag with all your transition gear. And sometimes, well, no, they'll have bike racks for you at Ironman too. The odd time they'll manage the bikes for you, but I won't get into that. Better to know where you're supposed to be going. So then on your walkthrough, knowing the flow, find your bike. Great. You know where that is. And now you're going to walk and you're going to go to the bike exit and you're going to check out where the mount line is. Where can I actually get on my bike? And then you're going to do it in reverse. So you're like, okay, I'm imagining now that I'm coming off the bike. Where is the dismount line? I want to know exactly where the dismount line is. And now I'm going back to where I need to rack my bike. So make sure you can find that spot in the reverse direction. And now I'm going to look for the run exit. And that's always an important one to know as well. So you're not running around transition wondering where to go. It's the worst, most sinking feeling in the world if you don't know where you're going in transition. You'll feel like you're losing minutes and minutes and minutes, even though it's probably only a few seconds. It'll still feel pretty horrible. So know the flow. That's it for now. Transitions are a really fun thing to practice. Even stuff as simple as practicing putting your helmet on and buckling it up as fast as you can. We used to do that if we were watching, a show at night. We're watching a movie or something. We'd have our helmets out and we'd see who could get their helmet on their head and buckled up the quickest. And it was fun playing little games like that. To just improve our transition times. Likewise, if you're riding on a trainer in the winter, you can keep your shoes in your pedals and practice that technique where you always leave the shoes in the pedals and you practice getting your feet in and out of the shoes. Something you'll definitely want to practice maybe on a grass field just in case you fall over. You want to be really confident with that one before you go do it in a massive group of people. So, leave that one until you're 100% sure that you're good to go with it. And then check out some stuff online. Check out some World Cup highlights, some Olympic highlights, and see how the best athletes in the world do their transition. It's pretty impressive how good and how competent they are in that part of it. And above all else, have fun. It's a great little skill to develop. And maybe if your swim, bike, and run is not that strong yet, you can have some bragging rights in having a fast transition. Okay, everybody, that's it for this week. Until next week, happy training, and we'll talk to you soon.